to the second workshop in a series that are being put on by Mike and I. We'll introduce ourselves here in a minute, but first we'd like everyone to briefly introduce themselves. We've got just a few people joined right now, but as people join, we'll come back to them as well. So why don't we just start with Rebecca, why don't you introduce yourself, give us your name, title, company name, and where you're located.
Sure. Good morning. Yes, good morning. I'm Rebecca Reynolds. I'm the VP of Sales and Operations for Harbinger Partners. We are a local staffing firm out here out of the Twin Cities, as well as have a national presence as well. We're a boutique staffing firm. And I'm located in Excelsior. We are a completely virtual company and have been since inception. Thanks for having us today.
Great.
Right, let me just admit Michaela here.
Julia, how about you introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, everyone. Julia Teskey, Marketing Manager with CalSense. CalSense is based in Carlsbad, California, but I am remote and I am located in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Fantastic.
All right, let me.
And Michaela, looks like you just joined. We're just doing quick introductions of everybody right now. Would you mind?
Great. Yeah. Well, no, I wouldn't mind. I'm Michaela Grunman. I'm the AVP of Product Management at Fortra. We're a cybersecurity company based out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and that's where I am located myself.
Fantastic. Why don't you and I introduce ourselves, Mike, since no one else is here yet, but if other people join, we'll certainly let them in.
Yeah, okay. It's hard for me to get, by the way, as other people join, it's hard for me to get to the accept button from where I am currently. So if somebody else can just admit them, that would be terrific.
I'll be watching.
Are you able to do that, Chad? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm Mike Haldane. I am obviously co-facilitating this workshop with Chad. Chad and I have known each other for many years and have worked together in a variety of different settings. For me personally, I've been in a variety of commercial roles for literally 35 years plus. I think I'm getting close to 36 years at this point. So it's been with companies like Maytag, which is where I started right out of school, Intel, 3M, and a lot of other organizations that I've either worked for directly or that I'm consulting with currently. My focus is on market research, strategic planning, and commercial execution, the latter two of which we'll be talking about in depth today. But it's always been, my roles have always been focused on commercial efforts in and around enabling growth. So that's where my expertise lies.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. I'll introduce myself. I'm Chad Eckes. I am the founder and principal of C2E, which is my independent consulting firm, which I've had for the last 16 years. I'm very blessed to be doing this type of work. Through C2E, I provide go-to-market strategy advisory, mostly to B2B technology companies, all B2B, but mostly tech, some manufacturing, some services. Prior to going out on my own, I worked at Accenture and 3M, and 3M is actually where I first worked with Mike for a number of years, and then we actually worked together again at Provation, which was part of Wolters Kluwer Health. But we've known each other for a number of years, and we decided a few months ago that it would be fun and hopefully educational for others in our network to do these sort of interactive workshops to help people and companies, think through the strategic planning process, execution, and things like that. So we're excited to be here today with you and go through some exercises to help us all get better at execution. You want to go to the next slide, Mike?
Yep.
Like I said today, or I think one of us said, Mike or I, this is the second workshop that we've facilitated together. There's a couple others planned. In our first workshop, we covered the main steps in strategic planning. And what we'll cover today all goes toward the learning objective of knowing how to transition from strategic planning to execution mode. So in particular today, we'll cover through exercises and interactive engagement, we'll cover setting up team members' roles and responsibilities, we'll talk about establishing plans and measurements and milestones for annual strategic initiatives. We'll also go through building an agenda for like a monthly meeting and a meeting cadence. And all of this is in the, the umbrella of developing those processes that help leaders balance their time between the day-to-day execution as well as, making sure there is time for the strategic. So we'll touch on that point throughout as well.
Chad, maybe just one point for Michaela. So Michaela, I don't believe you were at the first workshop, but we did record. And so if you're interested, I can send you the materials from that just so that you can see kind of what we covered there and how it relates to what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do that.
Move to the next slide, Mike, if you could. So So like Mike said, in that first workshop, we were covering the strategic planning process, and we went through most of these 6 parts of a framework. This is also in a white paper that Mike, I think, sent to everybody with the materials for this workshop. But just as a reminder, this is just review. The framework starts with the company's mission and vision statements, and that leads to developing strategic objectives, which are sort of like the 3 to 5 year big strategy items, and then strategic initiatives, which are more like 1 year or 1 to 3 year type of initiatives. Then that leads to developing annual plans for things like your product, your services, your marketing, your operating plans, etc. Put it a lot into financial terms. And then that last part of the framework in the upper left is called setup for execution. And that's the last step in this framework. And that's really what we're going into today. So next slide. So some of you have maybe seen your companies spend time and energy on developing strategic plans, and then you feel like it maybe goes on that proverbial shelf and no resources are put towards it, or it doesn't seem like there's a lot of traction happening with the strategic initiatives or the strategic plan. This is, a trap that a lot of people and leaders do fall into in our experience. There's just so many demands in the day-to-day of running the business and putting out fires, and it's just really easy to be pulled in a lot of different directions. It also could be that, companies don't have a great playbook. They might have a good playbook for creating a strategic plan, but they haven't figured out how to put it into action. When that happens, there's really never going to be great change or big things that occur at the company if everybody's just working on the day-to-day and the tactics. So to really achieve the value that's been laid out in a strategic plan, leadership teams need to manage the plan. They need to treat it like its own big initiative. It may even be more important than the strategic plan itself is executing it, right? That's where the real work happens. So creating and executing this plan, again, is the focus of today's workshop. And our hope is to give you some good processes and tools for keeping focus on the strategic goals and not getting totally sucked into the tactics day to day and getting just, wrapped around the axle with the busyness of the day to day. Mike, anything to add there?
Well, just that, it's a trap that all of us have fallen into at some point in our career. And, really what we're trying to accomplish today is to show you that the path to execution is not as complicated as it may first seem. And that, this can become a regular part of your workday rhythm if done well. And so our hope and expectation is that we'll show you, based on our experiences, how we've succeeded in making that happen. And that's really what this workshop is all about. But I think you covered it well, Chad.
Yeah, awesome. So we're going to get things going, get everyone's minds working here out of the gate. We're going to conduct a group exercise, and we'd like everybody to visit this 1-question survey. So you can use your phone. I don't know, Mike, if you have a URL, you could also paste into the chat.
I'm just gonna make one quick adjustment to how I'm sharing here so that I can switch from screen to screen. But yeah, you should be able to see my screen again, and I'm going to switch to this. And so you can either, If you can scan that with your phone and it works well, which it should, that's the easy way to do it. Or you can go to menti.com and use the code that you see up at the top of the screen there.
Oh, yep, there you go. But what we're asking everybody to do is you'll see 3 opportunities, and it's more. You can submit multiple times, but we're asking you to just put in like a word or a short phrase that answers this question: what factors have led to strategic plan execution failures at your organization? So we'll give people a little bit of time to enter those things in. I might enter a few in myself, and then when we see the word cloud appear, we'll dive into some of the bigger, more common issues and ask for people's thoughts on them. So let's take 30, maybe 60 seconds to do some word entering here on this survey. And if anybody has issues getting to the survey, just put it in the chat or raise your hand or just unmute yourself and let us know.
Yeah, just shout out and let me know, and I'll try to figure out a different way to get this to you. And I'm entering some of my own as well.
All right, just a few more seconds. Let's get a few more answers in if we can. I was able to enter like a couple, and then I tried to enter more, and
if you
my phone
so
froze.
it goes 3 at a time. So if you scan it and then enter your 3, you can scan it again and enter another 3.
I realize that now. Yeah.
Yep.
But I think we've got some good thoughts here already. So let's just dive in, if that's okay. I'll facilitate a little discussion here. So let's drill into lack of buy-in or not prioritized. If any of you put that one in, I'd love to hear the down arrow on that. Like, what happened? Why do you think lack of buy-in happens or things don't get prioritized? Anybody want to take a swing at that?
I was thinking lack of buy-in, and this might fall more in the planning stages of picking your initiatives. If everyone's not on board or they don't understand how it connects to the bigger picture, then you're going to have a more difficult time on when it comes to execution. So I guess
Sure.
it kind of starts at the beginning, but I can definitely see it showing up when it comes to executing.
Yep. Yeah, and we're going to touch on that a little bit, and that ties into poor communication, maybe leadership. That makes a ton of sense. What about not measuring well? Does somebody want to drill into that one? What is that? How does that resonate with people in terms of a failure?
I think stuff that, in the past when we've struggled with these things is maybe we aren't, through various reasons, able to, if the data isn't the greatest or we aren't super clear on how we're measuring what success looks like, but also, it's too far out where it's like, oh, we want to improve a retention number by this much, backing into that number to see like what other metrics can we see that are more proactive, if you will, so that we aren't like waiting till 6 months go by and like that number isn't changing. What are some other leading indicators, if you will, that we could and should be looking at more proactively to see, are we really on track to this or not?
Yeah, you are hitting on a very key point, which is breaking down the year so that you can see progress each and every month.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that. But without having that, what happens is exactly what you just described, which is you get to month 6 or month 7, and you say, well, we're trying to make this better, but it's we're not moving the dial at all. And so then what happens is people either give up or they start making big adjustments to the plan. They start adjusting down, and it's very common. And I think I would call it a trap, just simply because it's you're taking off bites that are too big and not looking at it month by month so that you can see the gradual progress that I think everybody is looking for.
Yeah.
Maybe time for one more drill down here, because there's a lot of similarities between the things that are on the board. The one thing that's kind of jumping out at me is that maybe we haven't talked about is the no ownership, and maybe that's tied with tied into leadership. Does anybody want to whoever put those in, or Rebecca, if you want to chime in to let us hear your voice, what about leadership and no ownership leads to these failures in the execution?
I put in the leadership one, and I think the no ownership piece ties perfectly into that, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the leader of the organization, but who within the organization is going to be the one to help execute on the strategy. And when there's no clarity on who is accountable for that, I think it just doesn't become a priority, right? Because you're just trying to keep the bus going and keep everybody moving along. And so then if you don't have anybody, essentially being accountable for it, then it doesn't get done.
Right.
Yeah, it's a super sharp point. And what I would say there, and we will talk about this, at length, Rebecca, but when I think of who leads the initiatives that we're going to talk about a little bit later, it's not necessarily the leadership team. It's the person within the organization that has demonstrated leadership qualities, leadership ability, and an interest in driving a particular initiative. And what I found is that when you set that person up with that leadership role, you tend to get really great results because they've got the proper level of motivation and know how to get it done. They may not know everything, but they have enough energy to make sure that it happens no matter what. And sometimes when this stuff falls on leadership shoulders, they already have so many things going on that it can quickly fall to the bottom of the priority list, and that's not what we want to have happen here.
Exactly.
Something else that I was thinking of as we're talking about ownership and leadership too is turnover and how that could impact, if you have a person on the leadership team that is also an owner of, these initiatives, making sure that there's a plan in place, so that just because that person leaves, there's someone else to fulfill that aspect of their role.
Yep. Very true, Julia.
All right. Well, I all of these words that came up and all of these discussion points, maybe it's because you read the introduction to the workshop, or it was clear from the learning objectives that these line up very well with the things that we're going to try to work through in some other exercises to help everybody here in the workshop be better at executing strategic plans. So I think I'm going to hand it over to you now, Mike, for just a few more slides and then leading into our next exercise.
Okay, thanks, Chad. All right, so let's get back to the deck here, and we will cover a few of the topics that we just identified. So we wanted to put a slide in here that talked about the transition from planning to execution, and we'll dive into each of these things with a little bit more specificity here shortly. But in terms of, the what, we'll start there. So, budget and resources for each strategic initiative, this always becomes the problem, right? Not just who owns it, but what are the other resources in terms of people and dollars and time and that sort of thing that it'll take to drive the initiatives that we're talking about. So the way I've seen this work in the past is that while the planning typically happens in the fall and into the holiday season, with the anticipation of being able to start actually driving the strategic plan right after the holidays, so come January 2nd, what needs to happen is that all of the needed resources need to become a part of the operating plan. So you may or may not remember from last time when we talked about the operating plan, we talked about how this was kind of the set of financial documents and that sort of thing that needed to include the things that we were going to go drive from a strategic standpoint. So it's not just what are the results we're going to get and how does that impact revenue and cash flow and margins and all of that sort of thing, but also what are the resources. And they may include things like extra dollars that we're going to spend, but also extra people that we're going to hire. So the how is to be sure that it's included in the year's plan. So if we're working through the strat plan for next year right now, those dollars and people and whatever other resources we think we're going to need for each of the initiatives, they need to be included in those plans as the operating plans and other things come together. That usually requires a whole lot of assuming, but that's okay. That's how we do this. We make assumptions based on what seems logical, based on what the research is telling us, and then we document all those assumptions, and then they make their way into the documents that we're talking about. And then, of course, we can course correct as we look at executing next year. The next thing is what we just talked about, which is the initiative owners and who the team members will be. So we're going to talk about the RACI matrix in a minute, but it's basically who's responsible, who's accountable, who's being consulted, and then who are the people that are included in terms of people that are affected by how the initiative goes and that sort of thing. So that I'll just go back to what I said a minute ago, and that is that yes, it takes a team, just like we talked about last workshop, but the owner, the R in the RACI matrix, does not have to be somebody on the leadership team. In fact, I've seen the best initiatives run by somebody who has a high level of motivation and interest and capability in terms of ability to learn and to change and all of those types of things. And it's a great leadership development thing as well. So if you've got somebody who's an up-and-comer that is looking for additional responsibilities and wants to be promoted and wants to be a leader in the organization, they're a great candidate for the R in the RACI matrix. And then, what happens after that is to start developing measures and milestones. So that's where we start talking about the monthly metrics that I think, Michaela brought up, or the lack thereof. We'll talk about that in depth, but it's important to have those monthly milestones so that you're making progress before you get to month 6 or month 9 or the end of the year or what have you. So it's the project plans, it's the SMART goals, just making sure that we're tracking each and every month. And then what's important is to put some process in place to ensure that adequate time is being spent on the initiative. So the way I've seen this work well for the past decade or so that I've been directly involved in this is to basically make the strategic initiatives a part of the leadership team meetings that tend to happen a couple of times a month or at least once a month. I've seen this work best where you've got an initiatives meeting that is part of a bigger leadership team meeting where you're looking at financials and cash flow and all of that sort of thing, and have it be monthly. And so your metrics are set up monthly, your owners are reporting out monthly, and then everybody has good visibility into how things are going. In terms of the individual and how you make time for this, if everybody is looking at this monthly and certain people within the organization have responsibility or accountability, or they're somehow involved in the various initiatives, they are going to be very motivated to make sure that their initiative is progressing so that when it's reported monthly, people can see that the the initiatives that they're working on are doing well and not being forgotten. So, time blocking is one way that I've focused on this personally, just by blocking time on my calendar. Julia and I have talked a lot about this over over the months. Just setting aside some time where you're not going to be disrupted by any other tactical things, and you just think through strategy, or you work on your initiative, you work on the things that need to be ready for the next team meeting, as an example. The Eisenhower matrix is simply a way to prioritize the effort. So Chad can probably talk more specifically about that, but it's basically just a criteria or a model for figuring out how you spend your time, your day, your week, your month, etc. And then the most important thing is what I think was highlighted when we did the first exercise, which is communication and making sure that every employee, every shareholder, every customer, and every partner truly understands what it is we're doing from a strategic standpoint, why it's important, and how what they're doing every day maps into that, especially on the employee side. So a lot of what I hear is that a strategic plan gets built, it gets rolled out, people don't really understand it. Employees within the organization don't understand how what they do each and every day maps to progress with the strategy. And so what we're advocating for here is that, number one, all functional areas are included in the planning. That doesn't mean every employee, but all functional areas. So, manufacturing, supply chain, sales, marketing, finance, et cetera, they all have a role to play in the strategic planning effort, so that nobody is forgotten from a functional standpoint once the plan is actually built. And then to take that, once the plan is built, with all functional areas having contributed, and explain it in detail in whatever you call your regular employee meetings, town halls, monthly meeting, whatever that meeting is called. Make sure that when you're in the fall and approaching the end of the year, that you're explaining the progress of building the strategic plan, and then when you get to the point of being done, explaining what it is, what the objectives are, what the initiatives for the year are going to be, what the teams look like, and all of that. And then again, map each and every job to success with the initiatives. They're not all jobs are going to map to every initiative, but I can promise that every job somehow maps to at least one. And if that's not the case, then we need to relook at the initiatives and make sure that they're actually the right initiatives. But that's how it should go. And then, of course, briefing members of, the board of directors and that type of thing. That's going to happen by just by virtue of the fact that, you're meeting with these folks on a regular basis anyway. And then, letting customers know. This can come in the form of one-on-one discussions, or it can come in the form of some sort of an advisory board. I've been a member or have driven advisory board type setups really since my Intel days back in the 90s. It's a great way to get feedback, but it's also a great way to provide insight to folks that are on the board on the customer side to help them understand where you're going and where your product development is being emphasized and that sort of thing. So those are some of the ways that we transition from planning to execution. In terms of roles and responsibilities, we kind of talked about this already. I guess the point that I would make is that, like with football or any team sport, strat planning is the same. So, again, all the functional areas need to be involved. Everybody needs to be bought in. And the way you do that is by going through a process that includes everybody's input, everybody's concerns, making sure that everything is properly vetted before the plan becomes in its final form. All right, so then the question becomes who executes, and we kind of talked about this already as well. So, execution is also a team sport. So we're going to talk about the RACI in a few minutes here. But again, the person that leads is not necessarily a person on the executive team. It could be that, or it could be a functional leader, it could be somebody with specialized expertise, or as I mentioned earlier, it could just simply be somebody who represents an up-and-comer within the organization. Maybe they're just a few years out of college, but they're demonstrating, big impact and enormous potential. And you want to give them something to really stretch their leadership skills before they're actually in that leadership role. This is a great way to do this. I've seen this work so well over the years. And so I'm really advocating strongly for this because it it puts that person in the position of really being able to grow for the year that they own that initiative and probably beyond that. But it also really demonstrates to the organization, what this person's capabilities actually are. They're going, especially if it's somebody that's newer in career, they're going to need support. They're going to need coaching and mentoring. But when you've got the right person leading these initiatives, great things can happen. And I've seen it happen time and time again. So I want to talk a little bit about culture. And the reason I want to talk about culture is because culture is an incredibly important part of strategy. And the reason I say that is because if the culture isn't right, if you have, people who maybe have a negative attitude, or, they are so pessimistic about the company's future that they just can't get on board with anything that's going to help it grow or help it do better with customers, or, gain in market share, or whatever it may be that the organization is looking to do, it really is a drag on the overall success of, the initiative or set of initiatives around the strategy. And so, when we first put these slides together, I think there was a little bit of hesitancy to talk about culture because it was a little bit unclear as to how this connected to strategy. But I'm just here to tell you that when the culture is positive, what I've seen is that mountains can be moved. And when it's not, what happens is hurdles get thrown up, and progress gets really slow or doesn't happen at all. And I've seen this in a number of different organizations, both large and small. And so, I always say that it takes a village to make big things happen. And I truly believe that that's the case. So some of the elements of culture, as I've worked with my clients, and, just based on my own experiences over the 35 years, plus that I talked about earlier, is that the vision and the mission needs to come from the top of the organization. It's not that when it's developed, it can't be done, in coordination with other people within the company. In fact, that's the preferred way of doing this, but it needs to be clear. What is it we do is the mission, what is our purpose? And then the vision is, how do we do it? What does our day-to-day look like? How do we serve customers? How do we develop products? How do we beat our competition so that we can exercise and ultimately achieve our mission as an organization? I mentioned this earlier, but everyone needs to understand the plan and why their role matters. And I can tell you that more times than not, when a strat plan that I've seen has been rolled out, people within the organization have said, I don't understand how my role connects to what we're trying to accomplish strategically. And when I hear that, I always want to take a step back and say, let's talk about that. Let's understand your role, the job description, and then let's talk about how it ties into what we're trying to accomplish from a strategic standpoint. This is how you get buy-in. And, it's what turns the environment from maybe one that's a little bit more negative than it should be to one that's positive and can do, because people can see, look, the mission is worth accomplishing. How we're going to get there, is worth working on. And I can see how my role is a part of that. So that's the position that we want to get ourselves into. Clearly having the right people in the right positions is key in any organization, whether it's, for the sake of the strategy or just the sake of the health of the organization as a whole. The other thing that I would say is that, transparency is really key, and, everybody needs to feel heard. It's not that we're going to take and run with every piece of advice or any ideas that people have to offer, and we're going to go try to do everything. We can't do everything. We can't boil the ocean, but everybody needs to feel heard. And so this concept of, and I learned this back in my Intel days, back in the late 90s, there was this concept of, okay, we're not always going to agree, but at some point, after everything has been vetted and everybody's been heard, we need to make a decision, and everybody needs to agree that we're going to commit. So there's the concept of, I don't agree with what we're doing, so I'm going to disagree, but I'm going to commit to what we're trying to accomplish, and I'm going to give it my full effort, and keep any negativity out of the conversation, and certainly not any of the I told you so type lingo that can happen as well. Leadership needs to be viewed as fair, as honest, as transparent, as authentic, consistent, and humble. And it's a lot to ask for a leader. And I'm here to tell you that I've worked with a lot of leaders and I've been in a lot of leadership roles throughout my career. They're not, most leaders aren't perfect. They probably haven't nailed all of these, but if they can at least be focused on trying to be all of these things, it's going to make them much more successful as a leader. And then finally, those who don't perform, and especially when everybody sees it and everybody knows it, at some point they have to be moved out of the organization because they can become a cancer to the organization that will start to bring other people down. And we don't want that to happen. And so that's why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting. So again, culture is a huge part of success, from a strategic standpoint. And what I would say is that, culture is where engagement comes from, and engagement is where all of the energy and can-do attitude and accountability comes from, which is why it plugs into strategy the way I'm suggesting. I'm going to pause there. Any thoughts on culture and kind of what you've seen work or what you've seen not work well?
I think in organizations I've been a part of in the past, like everyone in their role and kind of the way that plans come down, like you had that chart before of 3 to 5 years out, 1 year, what are we doing this year, and kind of having people plan around that. That works well. I've seen it actually happen opposite way where we try to do it planning differently, and we've with the purpose of trying to be more focused, but then not everyone necessarily has a direct tie to that. And that's causing more kind of chaos and things of where's everyone kind of going, and are we all heading in the same direction,
right?
Or not. So I've seen it. I've been a part of organizations in my past careers that have kind of had it both ways. So I like this is really, that's super important. And the culture piece to something I love about where I work now is we definitely look at both the performance and kind of the behavior, mentality, mindset as equal in looking at the whole, performance of a person. Because that in scenarios where they aren't willing to help problem solve or get over those hurdles and they're kind of putting more of them up, it really, really delays what we're trying to do. And that can not be great. So yeah, this definitely resonates overall, I think.
Yeah, that's great feedback. I think we've all seen this play out in positive ways and negative ways. I remember, going back, 10, 15 years, at some point during the interview process, when I was interviewing for a new position at a new company, and we would get to the point where they would say, do you have any questions for us? I always ask questions around, tell me a little bit about the culture, because when I wake up in the morning, I want to be excited about what I'm going to go do. So, the mission is important to me as well, but I want to be excited about, the environment in which I'm doing it. That's what motivates me personally. And, when the culture is positive and it's strong and it's can do, and, it's really trying to accomplish big things, it just makes it so much more fun to work there. And what I've seen, and I should have brought some statistics with me for this, I'll look for some after the fact, but, retention at an organization with a strong positive culture really isn't an issue in most cases. But if you think about the organizations that have big problems with retention, it's usually because the culture is off and people just don't want to be there. And that's not a recipe for success, with strategy or anything else for that matter. Thank you for your comments. All right, so I want to talk a little bit, Chad, I haven't overstepped my, I'm still good, right? We're going all the way to the next exercise before I hand back off to you. Yeah, I just want to make sure I haven't gone too far. So we talked about the RACI. Generally speaking, as I think we alluded to earlier, and what we talked about last workshop is that once we have the objectives, so the objectives are going to wind up being things like revenue growth, market share, maybe it's profitability or, something along those lines. The initiatives are going to be the things that we're doing this year that are in support of those longer term objectives. So, they can be a lot of different things. But, you know, it may be that you're looking to introduce a new product, or it could be like an as a service offering, for example. It could be that you're looking to expand geographically. It could be that you're looking to, you know, partner with somebody new on the channel side that's going to give you more exposure to prospective customers and that sort of thing. But you're going to wind up with, you know, if you have 3 to 4 strategic objectives, you're going to wind up with probably, you know, a similar number of initiatives. You definitely don't want to have any more than 5, because it just becomes too much to manage, too big a bite for, you know, a 12-month period. But let's just say that you wind up with, you know, 3 to 5. Each of them are going to have their own set of activities. So again, as we talked about earlier, somebody's going to be responsible. It's that person that's the up and comer that, you know, that you think has the capability of leading a whole initiative. You've got somebody who's accountable, somebody who's consulted, somebody who's informed. And so, you know, you start to build out these teams for the initiatives with those people included, but also other people within the organization. So these teams are not limited just to, you know, the people on the RACI. There are lots of other people that are probably going to be a part of the project team that would be involved as well, that are maybe, you know, contributing certain things based on their expertise or what they do every day from a job perspective or what have you. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. All right, so let's jump into the second exercise. And this one is happening on the Miro board. Everybody should have gotten an invite to Miro on, I think it was Friday of last week. Is everybody able to get into the Miro board?
Yep.
And I'll pull that up real quick here just to be sure. Okay.
Yep, I see Julia in there.
Okay.
See Mike.
Yep. Michaela's. Are you in there, Michaela?
Not yet.
I can put the.
No, she's in there. Yep.
Okay, we got Michaela, and has Rebecca dropped off?
Oh yeah,
Probably at
yeah,
this
she
point.
did.
Yeah, okay,
She had to drop off at 11:30
Okay.
Central.
Okay. All right. So for the first exercise basically is to, how did I get there? Is to create a RACI based on the case study. So has everybody had the chance to review the case study?
Mhm.
Okay. So what we want to do then is to build out a RACI. Chad, let's see, I've got to get to. Oh, there it is. Okay. So what we want to do then, based on the case study, is identify who we think for each of the initiatives that we've identified. So in this case, we've identified 5, and you know, we'll have to decide if we have enough time to get through all of this chat or not. But we've identified 5 initiatives, and we want to pick somebody who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each of the 5. Julia, I know you know how to do this because you were at the last workshop, but Michaela, for your benefit, if I guess the easiest way to provide answers is to use the sticky note feature. So if you can see what I'm doing with my screen now, I just highlight sticky note and I click with my left button, and it gives me the ability to create a sticky note, and then I can plug in whatever I want to do here, and then I can move it over just by simply dragging it to the appropriate space. And by the way, in case anybody forgot, the way that you move the screen around is by holding down the right mouse button and then just moving your mouse. And if you want to make the screen bigger, you can do that with the wheel on the mouse. All right, so why don't we break this up, Chad? I don't know if you had anything particular in mind, but I'm thinking maybe we work on maybe Julia, if you wanted to take the first row, and Michaela, you wanted to take the second, maybe we could start there.
Julia I know you submitted your answers prior to the call today, which is great. So you probably just can refer to them and type
Copy
them in
paste.
there.
Yep.
Yep, exactly. And Michaela, if you want to use a sticky note or just type right into the box itself, that should work. I think we'll, not to put the two of you too much in the spotlight here, but I think having a discussion about maybe two of these to sort of get different answers and see if we come up with the same ideas, in terms of who's responsible, who's accountable, knowing what you know about the case study and the org chart. So
Yeah, and I think just for the sake of time and the number of people that we have involved here, I think let's just do the first two and then we can move on to the next exercise.
Yeah. Because Mike and I probably have our opinions as well. And so it'd just be a good conversation to see if we're all on the same page or if there's any thoughts on. I think the key ones are obviously responsible, accountable, and potentially consulted.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong answer with these. It's really, and by the way, you don't have enough information to really do this, in a real way. But I think the main thing is to, sort of go through the exercise of, okay, who's going to own this, who's going to be accountable, et cetera. So we don't need to spend a huge amount of time here.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm looking at Julia's answers here. Let's maybe just, it looks like Michaela's almost finished as well, but with launching a new drug discovery platform. So the thinking there is somebody at the VP level is responsible, particularly in the data science or product management area, but the accountable executive leader is the CTO. That makes a lot of sense to me personally, because it's very like product centric kind of initiative compared to the other ones, which are, more like go to market, like, expanding into a market, partnership sort of things. So was that kind of what you were thinking, Julia, in terms of how you picked the responsible and accountable personnel?
Exactly. And kind of as I was going through this again, I was wondering, should you, there was some idea for potentially overlap with the product manager. Should I keep to just having one person to a swim lane? Does that make sense? Or should you, is it okay to have someone who's responsible and consult, or maybe that's not, responsible and accountable. I just wasn't sure where the overlaps might happen.
Yeah, here's what I would say about the overlaps. You don't want to have overlap with responsible, and you probably don't even want to have overlap with accountable, although sometimes that happens when you've got, initiatives that are maybe, technically focused, product focused, or what have you. You might have like a, chief technical officer or a chief product officer that has accountability for a couple, but, you've got that person has a couple of people on his or her team that are responsible, so it's okay. But with consulted and informed, you're probably going to see a lot of overlap there. And while we didn't give you enough information to do anything different than what we're doing today, I want to just refresh everybody's memory in terms of, right now we're kind of pulling from the org chart, which is the exercise. But in the real world, as I said earlier, it may not be anyone on that org chart that is actually going to lead these, or that's going to be consulted or even informed. So you would have to show the entire company's org chart to get to that level of detail. But just keep in mind that, in the real world, as we talked about earlier, it may not be somebody with a VP title that's responsible, for example. So really, the idea behind this exercise was just to get everybody comfortable with identifying ownership and accountability and so forth. Does this feel pretty straightforward? Is this similar to what you've done, within your organization, or is this feeling too complex or something along those lines?
No, this is good.
Agreed.
Okay. So Chad, I think just for the sake of time, because we are a little bit behind, we
Sure.
probably don't need to spend much time here. I think we can probably move on to the next exercise.
Great. And I think we can just stay right here on the Miro board and just if everybody scrolls sort of to the right.
Yeah.
The idea of this next exercise was to take the strategic initiatives, again, there were 5 listed out in the case study, and to turn them into more measurable goals. And, you know, we use the acronym SMART. I think that was described earlier, but again, it's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So presumably we've all used this framework before, but also surprisingly, it doesn't seem to be deployed as often as it should when it comes to, you know, putting a pin on strategic initiatives. And as Mike was saying earlier, you know, it can help to define not just a single SMART goal for the year, but to break it down into like multiple quarters or months or things like that. So that's what we wanted to, you know, get some brainstorming on with this exercise, is just to start putting down some ideas in terms of what does a SMART goal look like for each of these initiatives. And since we worked on the first 2 with the RACI matrix, we can just traverse right over to these 2 as well. And if we have time, we can go into like the 3rd, 4th, or 5th initiatives. But
Chad, I do have a couple of slides that I think might add a little bit of color.
oh, sure.
Maybe let me do that first, and then we can jump into the exercises.
Can do.
Okay. So I want to, so we just talked about the RACI matrix and we did the exercise. So now we know who's going to own it and who's going to be involved, which is great. But the next thing is to understand, kind of getting to the point that I think Michaela made earlier around, you know, hey, we don't want to be 6 months in and realize that we're not really getting the traction that we think we need. So as a part of that leadership meeting that we said was going to be, you know, part leadership meeting with its agenda and part review of the initiatives and how we're tracking toward, you know, the objectives that we set up for that 3 to 5 year period. Really what we're trying to accomplish here is to get to the point of understanding, you know, the implications of the initiative. So for example, how does the initiative that we're talking about, or the set of initiatives that we're talking about, map to revenue, to gross margin, to EBITDA, to cash flow, et cetera? And there's a bunch more underneath this, by the way, that are maybe even more specific to, you know, individual initiatives. But the point here is you've made a bunch of assumptions as a part of putting together the strategic plan, and now you've got, you know, a RACI matrix, and you understand what you're trying to accomplish in the given calendar or fiscal year. So now how does that play out from the standpoint of month to month? So the idea here is that, you know, we would have metrics for each of the initiatives, and we would break it apart by month. And that's what we'll do in the exercise as well, or at least talk about that part of it. We'll probably talk about, okay, what are the, you know, what's the goal for the year? And then we can talk about how do we break that apart so that it's 1 month at a time. But the idea is that we've got ways to sort of track progress as we go, and so that everybody can see kind of how things are going. The next thing is to have a project plan. So, you know, the way I've seen this work well is that each initiative has a project plan that's developed by the team, led by the person that's the R on the RACI matrix, the responsible party. And basically, you know, they've got a full view of, you know, typically it's all 52 weeks, and they say, okay, here are the categories of activity that need to happen for us to achieve what needs to be achieved for this initiative this year. So it's, you know, traditional project plan format. You've got the name of the initiative, you've got the owner, you know where you are in the year. You've got a tracker off to the right that shows you, you know, where you are and where you're supposed to be. And basically you just report out to the team, you know, every month, here's how we're progressing. Here's where we're slower than anticipated. Here's where we're ahead of schedule. And this coincides with the monthly metrics that we talked about on the previous slide that we'll talk about on the exercise when we get back to that. And then I'm going to talk well, we're going to talk more about sort of how you manage the, the agenda and that sort of thing. But before we do that, let's jump back into the exercise and talk about what we think makes sense based on the case study that we just chatted about. So I'm going to go back to that. For those that are following what I'm displaying, I'm back to the Miro board. So I think, again, for the sake of time, we don't need to spend a huge amount of time here, but I do think that we should, I want to make sure that everybody is comfortable in translating sort of what makes sense from the standpoint of converting initiatives into something numeric. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. I'm going to go back to the case study. So, in the case of the case study, we said that our objectives were, for example, if you look at what's in blue here, so for expand market penetration, we said that we wanted to move from 17% market share to 20% market share. So that's going to be happening over this 3-year period. And so, one of the ways that we're going to do that is by we're going to be expanding into emerging markets. You could argue that launching a new drug discovery platform is going to help us with market share, potentially partnering with academic institutions, et cetera. So what we want to try to accomplish here is, okay, how do we look at the next 12 months? Let's just start with, launching a new drug discovery platform. How do we determine where we want to be in 12 months? So we know that we want to launch the platform, but what are the things that we need to have happen over the course of the next 12 months that will sort of tell us that we're progressing when we do this report out once a month with the bigger team? That's what we want to try to answer here. So if I go back to the Miro board and I say, okay, basically our initiative, the first initiative is to launch a new drug discovery platform. What are the things that represent having launched that between now and the end of the year? And it's probably going to be things like, we've got we have an understanding of what the requirements of this platform are. We have a launch date, we have a launch plan, we have, whatever those things might be. To launch a new platform. Those are the things that we want to try to capture here.
So something like this right, Mike? I mean, you've got a time, you've got a particular deliverable, and it's like we need a launch plan by the end of Q1, or maybe it's even, by the end of January or something like that.
Right.
But is that sort of meets the SMART goal definition, right?
Yeah.
Julia, I know you had some ideas on this one too, if you wanted to jump in, because or Michaela, if you have any ideas on this, but I just wanted to get some collaboration going here as well.
Yeah, so I need to maybe look back at the case study. Is the goal to have the platform launched within the same year, or was that a further timeline? Because I was thinking have everything done by Q4 of the same year, but okay.
Yeah. See, that's the way to think about it, Julia. So, yes, we are going to launch. We haven't given much, input as to where are we in the process, but by the end of the year, or it may be, by the end of the third quarter, who knows? This is just an exercise, but we want to have that new drug discovery platform launched. So if you just think about, let's just assume that we're going to launch it, in November before the holidays. What are the things that need to happen? The big things that need to happen to make that a reality. And whatever we come up with here, not today, but in general, whatever we come up with here is going to wind up when we talked about this, right? This is the initiative project plan. The category that we've identified here, what we come up with Post-it notes for this exercise are going to wind up being the categories on this project plan. And then there's going to be a whole lot of detail, tactical things that need to happen to make that category a possibility. But if you say, you know, for example, that we want to develop a launch plan, well, guess what? The launch plan is going to be one of these categories on the project plan. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think, you know, milestones like, yeah, okay, we've got 85% of the features, you know, tested by Q3. We've got a launch plan that's built out in Q1. You know, maybe there's a set of activity around, you know, training a channel or training our own internal sales team. Maybe, you know, because we're in the med device space or we're in the medical space, maybe there's some sort of an FDA clearance that needs to happen. So it's those types of things. You're going to wind up with things that you know, are kind of the big milestones, if you will, that you're going to build your project plan around. Michaela, is this making sense to you?
Yeah, I think some of the elements I would include do they fall outside of or within that launch plan tactics?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at. But then the other, like, just kind of thinking back to, you know, like a success metric almost, like what, you know, if we're going to launch this in end of year, what is kind of that first, what kind of level of customer user adoption, call it, we'd want to start tracking, right? Is that through a beta program initially and you have a number of customers using the platform, or is it more of a percentage of, there wasn't enough context there for me to kind of put a number to it, but that's how I was thinking about a goal for this one, is like achieve X% of user adoption by a certain time.
Yep, that's a great one. And by the way, the beta program, right? I mean, that's a great milestone to have there. So, you know, again, coming back to the project plan, you know, complete start and finish of a beta program, you know, would probably be a big category here that we would identify as part of the project plan. And then there was I don't know who added it, but 85% of the features tested by Q3. So that's where you can start to quantify this and say, okay, well, if that's the case, then as I look at my, so kind of going back to the PowerPoint slide here, as I look at my KPIs or my SMART goals, you know, how can I, if I need to have 85% done by the end of Q3, so, you know, by the end of September, what do I need to be doing in April, May, June, and July? So maybe it's, you know, it's 60% in April, it's 65% in May, it's 70% in June, you know, et cetera. So that's how you can start to quantify some of these so that you can see that progress is being made, even on things that, you know, maybe don't seem so quantifiable at first. Does that make sense? Because these things all connect, and I want to make sure that everybody is seeing the connecting points. Julia, are you seeing the connecting points?
Yes, I just realized that you couldn't see me nodding my head.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah, sorry. I can't see anybody at the moment, but I know you're
yes,
there.
this makes sense.
Okay. All right. So, you know, that's the basic idea here, is to make sure that we're able to, you know, set up our milestones for the project plan, and that within those milestones, we've got goals that we can break down to 1 month at a time so that we can track progress and make sure that we're actually doing, you know, the things at the pace that we said we wanted to go do them. So, Chad, I think at this point, again, just given the time constraints that I know we have, I think what we should do is I think we should go back. Well, let's do. We kind of talked about the strategic initiatives progress meeting, but I think let's go through exercise 4 and just talk a little bit more specifically about, you know, what that meeting might look like. I've kind of talked about this, at least I've talked about what I've seen work well. But if you assume that for, you know, for once a month, if we're going to be meeting to show the leadership team and whoever else is involved in these initiatives what our progress looks like. I'll just say that the way I've seen this work well in the past is to have each of the responsible parties and their team present their project plan and present their monthly breakdown of SMART goals, and basically demonstrate to the organization where they're doing well, where they're struggling, et cetera, so that a discussion can ensue that basically says, okay, it looks like you're on track, or it looks like you're on track with part of your plan, but not all of your plans. So for the things that are not on track, how do we as a leadership team, or we as a team as a whole, help get you back on track, so that we're not in a situation where we just say, well, that didn't work, let's forget this initiative. We say, no, let's understand where it's working, where it's not working, where we maybe need to adjust our numbers or our expectations, or maybe even adjust the plan. And it's that discussion that adds all the value. But I don't want to say too much. So as you think about, just put yourself in the shoes of an owner of one of the initiatives. How would you like to see the agenda sort of play out? If you own this thing and you've got just assume that all the right people are in the room to help you. You've got the leadership team there, you've got your team for the initiative there, you've got the people that are accountable and responsible and all of that. How would you like to see the agenda sort of play out so that you feel supported as the one that owns the initiative? That's the way I think we should think about this.
So I put in the, oh, go ahead,
No,
Julia.
go for it. I was just going to say, I like what you put in that.
Yeah, I put it in
breaks
the
it down
chat, just it's very similar, Mike, to what you were speaking on, but a lot of times when we've done this here, actually, we've kind of taken this framework of each person representing kind of their goal. We start with the key win. So we are always, that goes back to culture, right? Celebrating success. That's a huge part of what we're doing.
Yep.
And that might be a few minutes, but like, what is something that's a key win, whether we achieved the metric or we, tackled a big hurdle, whatever it might be. And then we speak to what progress was made since the last time we met. So that goes to, the measuring of, are we on or off track? What roadblocks has there been, or, that if we are off track, are we running into, and what are our plans? Having that, responsible person come with ideas of how we plan to tackle that. That also then opens it up for discussion, like, hey, I need help from your team or this person, or questions, that kind of generates discussion. And then, following up, what are we essentially, quote unquote, committing to as a next step until we kind of meet again, if you will.
Yeah, those are all the things that I'm thinking about as well.
Yeah.
Michaela, because this should be a supportive environment. I've seen this play out a couple of different ways. One is, oh my gosh, I'm walking into a buzzsaw, right? That's not the environment that we're looking for. The other is, I'm going to come in and I'm going to give a completely transparent view of how my initiative is going, and where I'm struggling, I'm going to get the support that I need to not be struggling anymore. So I love your idea of, let's start with a win, and then let's talk about what progress has been made, where the roadblocks are. How do we mitigate together as a team? It's not, they're going to hang me out to dry because I own the initiative. It's, hey,
right.
There are things that we didn't anticipate that we're now encountering. So how do we deal with that? Right. I need more resources. I need to spend more than I anticipated, or whatever it may be. But the person that owns this, again, this is the, especially if this is the up and comer that you're trying to build into a leader, the last thing in the world you want to do is tear them apart. Because, something is amiss on the project plan, right? Or with their initiative in general. So love that.
Yeah, I like how this is kind of a template, no matter what initiative you're talking about too. It helps to kind of make each section of the agenda its own. It's like a familiar language. Everyone knows what to expect when it comes to the next person sharing their update.
So just to give you a little bit more insight into the way I've seen this work well is, there's a, in most organizations, there's a leadership team that happens once a month. Maybe there's like a biweekly thing that happens as well, but usually there's a full review of kind of how we're doing, at the beginning of the month and looking back, year to date at that point or something along those lines. So, and that usually takes to do a thorough review, probably half a day, and you're reviewing HR stuff and financial stuff and all of that sort of thing. And then the other part of the day, so the second half of the day, or it could be the first half of the day, but that's where you do the review of the strategic initiatives. So if you just assume that you've got 8 hours in the day, the first half of it on, one day a month is going to be for leadership topics, whatever those might be. And the second half of the day is, in this case, let's just say we have, 4 initiatives. You're going to have 1 hour dedicated to each of the 4 initiatives. So the second half of the day, let's just say it's from 1 to 5, is covering, each of the 4 initiatives in depth with the leader of that initiative presenting, here's where we are, here's my project plan, here's how we're tracking, here's where we're behind, here's where I need help, etc. That I've seen work really well. And it's not the only way to do it, certainly, but it's what I've seen work well in previous positions where I've owned these initiatives or I've been on the leadership team. And again, the culture is key, but it gives it ample time, because if you rush through it in 10 minutes or 15 minutes and just say I'm on track, don't need any help, that's not the level of transparency that we're looking for here, because these are the big mountain moving initiatives for the organization. So everybody's got something, at stake here. Any other comments on this before we move on? Chad?
Just thinking about the check-in meetings, so obviously the once a month with the entirety of the leadership team, everyone who might be involved.
Yep.
But then what about frequency for just each initiatives team? Like going back to kind of the RACI, is that weekly check-in? What kind of have you seen with how often?
Yep. So that's thank you for bringing that up, Julia. Yeah, it's a great question. What I've seen work well is that the team, so this is just the initiative team now that we're talking about, is meeting once a week, and they're communicating constantly. So there's communication happening over email, over text, over voice, over whatever, every single day as people are working on their part of the initiative. And then the team gets together once per week just to sort of check in. And then, by the time you get to that monthly leadership team meeting, everybody is completely aligned. Progress has been made. And, the report out is generally a positive one, even if there are things that they need help with.
Got it.
This
That's
is where
super
the
helpful.
the engagement,
Yeah.
and the culture play in,
Yeah.
right? So.
Yeah, and I've been privy to the teams where I'm reporting to the responsible party, and I've also and it's weekly, but I've also been privy to where I'm the responsible party, and I'm getting input on a weekly meeting, one-on-one meeting basis. So
Yeah.
I think that's pretty typical.
I would say a lot of what we're trying to accomplish here is to keep the momentum where it needs to be. So if the team knows that every week they're gonna report out on sort of their part of what's going on with the initiative, and then every day there are interactions amongst the team members, everybody stays pretty well engaged, and you don't really have people falling off the map and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then everybody knows that, hey, once a month we need to come in and present to the leadership team kind of how this is progressing. It provides a level of motivation to make sure that this is tracking as well as it possibly could, because everybody is holding themselves accountable to the rest of the team that way. And that's a big part of this. And again, it goes back to the culture, but I think, just knowing that, hey, everybody's got eyes on this, and, my personal reputation is on the line as well, because I'm a part of this team, and this team is a part of, what's happening from an overall strategic standpoint. I think it puts everything in proper focus.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Chad, I'm going to turn back over to you then for
Sure.
kind of a wrap up of the slides.
Yep.
Let me just get to the right slide here.
Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to make one more key point before we wrap up and send you on with the day. So what we've covered today, again, are just a few tools and processes for helping companies and teams maintain that appropriate focus on the strategic plan and strategic initiatives, so that people don't get into the habit of sinking all their time into tactical busy work. But despite putting monthly meetings in place and developing, RACI and communicating progress and so forth, it often ends up being each individual's responsibility to really have that mindset to actively balance their time between strategic and tactical work. So to that end, Mike and I, through our experience and what we encourage people and teams to do is to, do some time tracking and figure out, what are you spending your time on, and really think about it and measure it, and get into the habit of planning the schedule for your week and even your month, just to make sure you're blocking time to spend on the strategic aspects of what you're being asked to do. So, just to put it into practical terms, take 15 to 20 minutes each month, maybe have it on your calendar, at the beginning of the month. And then your goal is to look at your next 4 weeks and figure out, okay, where are my pinch points going to be? Oh, I'm traveling this week, so that's going to be tough, or I'm doing this. But you've got to, be proactive about blocking that time. And, one of the tools we had listed earlier was that Eisenhower matrix. It's simply a 2x2 matrix where you have urgency and importance you can kind of put your different tasks or things that are in your queue. And, the urgent, important ones are where you really got to, spend time right now. But the important ones that aren't urgent, those are the things you need to, block your time for in those next like 2 to 4 weeks. So using those strategies, using those tools can be helpful to make sure you're balancing that time. And again, I think all of us are really bound by our calendars. So taking that proactive approach and just sitting down with your calendar can be useful. And a lot of people that I've worked with, use that strategy. But everybody's, has their own methods, whether it's the calendar or like a reminders app or a notes app or something. But the point is to be purposeful about it, and just to make sure you don't get sucked into all the busy work and you do have time for the strategic work. Anything to add there, Mike?
No, I think you nailed it, Chad.
Awesome. All right, so we're at the end of our time here, and Mike and I would certainly like to thank all of you for attending and participating in the workshop today and doing some of the homework in advance. We hope you learned some things and have some takeaways to share with your team and others at your company. We just want to reiterate 4 points that we know we covered during the workshop, but just wanted to make sure we put an accent on them. The first is that it is very important to develop a plan for achieving the strategic initiatives. Without a plan, without a process, without a project plan, that strategy plan might just sit on the shelf, won't come to fruition, and no big changes are going to happen at the company, which is unfortunate, especially if a lot of time and effort was put into the strategic plan. Secondly, the company's culture, Mike hit on this, is really super important. It's what's going to drive the engagement across all levels of the organization, and it's going to drive that sense of accountability and people wanting to own up to what they're assigned. So it's really super important. I'm glad we did re-include that slide, because it all starts with that accountability and people being engaged and wanting to do what the company has set out for their goals. Thirdly, setting those monthly milestones and having monthly meetings focused on the strat initiatives, that can help keep people focused. They're on a cadence, they know what's going to happen every month, whether they're the person responsible, accountable, or even just consulted. They know the organization is moving towards those strategic initiatives, and they're being reported on, they're being measured, and the organization has that purpose to accomplish those initiatives in that year. And then lastly, this is what I just ended with, team members need to be purposeful about balancing their time. Again, I mentioned some tactics with that, but again, that comes with a culture as well. So I think if everybody is actively managing their time because they know it's important to work on strategic things, then that's going to permeate everybody's habits, right? It becomes a cultural habit that everybody just makes sure that they're balancing their time. So anything to add there, Mike, before we sign off?
No, I think we're good. A couple of things that I want to go through, though, when we're done with this slide. I just want to be sure that we've covered the last little bit here.
Yeah, I think we have. So yeah, if you have a couple other things you want to cover, we can cover those and then we can sign up.
Yep. Yeah, so I wanted to just put a little bit of, we didn't have time for this today, but we will make this a workshop topic for the future. But we talked a little bit today about, what happens when things are off track. And so, we've got this this process that it's not ours. It's been out there for a long time, but it's called 5 Whys. And we'll talk about this in depth. But I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that sometimes, what happens is you run into things that you didn't anticipate. And it's important when that happens to get to, not just what are we seeing in terms of symptoms, but what is the root cause and then how do we address it. So we'll cover this in a future workshop. But it comes with brainstorming and an action plan once the root cause is identified and that sort of thing. And we can make some of these tools available today if you're already familiar with this. We have the tools built, so we can make those available as well. The last thing I wanted to hit on then is our next workshop. So our next workshop is going to cover market research. So we're going to be talking a little bit about qualitative research and a little bit about quantitative research on the primary side, and then we'll talk a little bit about secondary research as well and some of the things that you can do with ChatGPT and that sort of thing. So we'll be sending invites out for this shortly, and it'll be on the 19th of November. If you look at a calendar, this is well in advance of Thanksgiving, so we try to avoid that at all costs. Thanksgiving's happening pretty late this year, so we'll do it with plenty of time to recover for the holidays. And then we haven't decided whether or not we'll do anything in December yet, but we know that we want to hit the root cause analysis and how to solve challenges, as early in the year as we can. So more to come on that. But anyway, just heads up that this is our next workshop. It's focused on market research. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that the materials from today and the recording and templates and all of that will be sending out shortly so that you've got access to all of that as well. And of course, Chad and I are here to answer any questions that may come up after the fact or what have you. So we're here as a resource whenever you might need that also. So as Chad said, thank you very much for attending today. We hope to see you at a future workshop as well. And all the best for the rest of your day and your week.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you both so much.
All right, thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.